All right, Alexander, we need to talk about President, Vice President Kamala Harris. But she's definitely acting like a president because we have this story. I think it was actually, I think National Pulse actually caught this because I think they tried to slip it in this this memo, this readout of Kamala Harris speaking with President Emmanuel Macron of France. And I think they tried to get this under the radar, but National Pulse actually caught it, and the story has gone viral, and it's an incredible story. The title of the National Pulse article reads: Kamala Harris is now making Joe Biden's head of state calls for him. Let me read you the readout. The White House published the readout yesterday, and the readout's title says: "Readout of Vice President Kamala Harris's call with President Emmanuel Macron of France." Vice President Kamala Harris spoke today with President Emmanuel Macron of France and expressed her commitment to strengthening bilateral ties between the United States and France and to revitalizing the transatlantic alliance. Vice President Harris and President Macron agreed on the need for close bilateral and multilateral cooperation to address the CV, climate change, and support democracy at home and around the world. They also discussed numerous regional challenges, including those in the Middle East and Africa, and the need to confront them together. This is the best part. This is the best part. The vice president thanked President Macron for his leadership on the issue of gender equality and for France's contribution to NASA's Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. Okay. The vice president thanked President Macron. Alexander, I could talk for hours about what's so wrong with this. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And can I just say and remind our viewers that Alex comes from a diplomatic family. His father was a very prominent diplomat. He is extremely familiar with the way in which diplomatic contacts are conducted and what the correct protocols are. I don't come from a family of that kind. We were not diplomats in my family, but we certainly were ministers and things of that kind, and I have some familiarity with the way in which international relations are conducted. This is an extraordinary call. It breaks every principle of the way in which diplomatic relations between two countries are conducted. First, few things to say about it. Now, that readout from the White House doesn't make it clear who telephoned whom, but in fact, it's quite clear if you go to the French media that it was Kamala Harris who called Macron, just as it was Kamala Harris who apparently called Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, a short time ago. Now, just unpack this readout, which Alex has just read. Just consider carefully the things that it says. Kamala Harris spoke today with President Emmanuel Macron of France and expressed her commitment to strengthening bilateral ties between the United States and to revitalize the transatlantic alliance. And then at the bottom, the vice president thanked President Macron for his leadership on the issue of gender equality and for France's contribution to NASA's Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. So, Kamala Harris, who is not the President of the United States, not the head of the executive branch, not the person who conducts foreign policy on behalf of the United States, not the person who appoints US officials, not the commander-in-chief of the US Armed Forces. Kamala Harris is telephoning the French president, expressing commitments on behalf of the United States to the French president to strengthen bilateral ties between the United States and France and to revitalize the transatlantic alliance, is thanking on behalf of the United States the French president for his leadership on various issues, and is discussing topics of foreign policy and pandemic policy, again on behalf of the United States, with the French president. And indeed, she goes into the weeds, as we would say. She discusses regional challenges, including those in the Middle East and Africa, and the need, this is, I'm quoting directly, the need to confront them together. In other words, she is speaking in this readout, in this conversation, on behalf of the United States. She is not the Secretary of State. She is not the President. She is going far beyond her official duties and her powers. She is in effect behaving as if she was the President. She is usurping his role, and she is taking charge in these conversations with Trudeau and especially with Macron of US foreign policy, and acting as if she was the President of the United States. In any other administration, this would be extraordinary. Just imagine what would have happened in any other administration. Just imagine if during Franklin Roosevelt's time, the Vice President had spoken to Winston Churchill in this way and had made commitments during the war with Winston Churchill on behalf of the United States. Just imagine if Mike Pence, when Donald Trump was president, had spoken to foreign leaders in this fashion and had this thing going up on the White House website. The fact that this is going on shows, I think it proves conclusively, that Joe Biden is president of the United States in name only, and that the real power is with other people, and that Kamala Harris is exercising that role to an extraordinary degree. It also shows, because remember, Kamala Harris is not very experienced in US foreign policy, that the ground is already being prepared for her to take over, and that this will happen sooner rather than later. Now, we've been discussing this on these programs on the Duran for a long time. Here we see a readout from the White House that in effect says those very things. Now, this is so unorthodox and extraordinary, it just beggars the belief. But of course, it also highlights some very uncomfortable realities about the political realities today in the United States, because the United States has been an extraordinarily stable political system because the American people have known that those people who are appointed to high office or who are elected to high office actually exercise it properly on their behalf. There has never been a situation in the United States where the person who is elected doesn't exercise his functions properly and someone else exercises them instead. The United States has no history of shadow shoguns, like, the situation which used to exist in Japan under the empire, where the shogun was in charge and the emperor merely fulfilled a ceremonial role. That has never existed in the United States, and that has been a central feature and quality of US democracy. What we now see is something different for the first time, and it is both dubious constitutionally and, to my mind, calls into question the democratic character of the US government at this time.
Yeah, the byline under the National Post article reads, Vice President Kamala Harris has begun to take calls on behalf of President Joe Biden, raising questions about his ability to do the job of president. So, okay, we could focus on the fact that Biden just doesn't have the stamina to do this job. That's obvious. There's no doubt about it.
Well,
that he
absolutely.
he probably can't go through a full grueling day of being president of the United States.
no.
So there's definitely the factor that they've put Kamala Harris in there to pick up much of the slack. You mentioned Trudeau as well. I'm on Daily Mail, which also has the article of Kamala Harris's call with Trudeau, and it has the title "Kamala Harris has her first call with a foreign leader as vice president, as she holds talks with Justin Trudeau on CV, climate change, and diversity." And in much the same way that they highlighted the call with Macron, this is pretty much the same types of policies that the vice president of the United States is dictating to the leader of Canada, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. And so my question is this. I got a lot of questions, actually, which I'll throw at you. The first one is, you mentioned that most likely Kamala Harris called Macron. I wonder if Kamala Harris initiated the call with Trudeau. That's my first question. I mean, is she actually actively calling the world leaders on behalf of Joe Biden, which is very, very odd and just a terrible look for any country. I mean, this looks really, really bad from a foreign policy perspective. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I would imagine that both Macron and Trudeau, for all their faults or the ridicule that we also throw at them, would have been insulted by this action, because this is an insulting action. You should have the president calling up the president or the prime minister. To have a vice president call up the prime minister or the president is without a doubt an insult. It is an insult on the world stage. So that's the other thing that I want to say. And the third thing that I want to say is, as they're reporting on these phone calls that Kamala Harris is having with world leaders and talking policy with world leaders, the media, and the National Post highlights this, the media is focusing squarely on Biden and the fact that he was playing, and let me make sure I get this right, Alexander, the fact that he was playing Mario Kart with his grandchildren. That was the big story. So distraction, in other words, let's just focus on these little insignificant things that grandfather Joe Biden is doing, while the Vice President Kamala Harris is being groomed to take over his position in, say, maybe a year or two.
Yes. Well, that's exactly right. I mean, can I just make a point? If Joe Biden was in charge, and if Joe Biden had appointed Kamala Harris, let's say he'd appointed Kamala Harris his climate change czar, and Kamala Harris telephoned Emmanuel Macron to discuss climate change, that would be unusual, but you could just about explain that. What makes this call with Macron, for me, astonishing is that it covers every aspect of US relations with France. So we have discussions about security cooperation and the state of the transatlantic alliance. We've got discussions about the pandemic. We've got discussions about climate change. We see discussions about support for democracy at home and around the world. Well, we probably know what that means. We see discussions about regional challenges, the Middle East, Africa, and the need to confront it together. We see discussions about gender equality issues and France's role in the US space program. So it covers the whole range of US relationships with France. And this instance, this conversation between Kamala Harris and Macron, it's quite clear that it was Kamala Harris who initiated that call. I don't know whether she initiated the call with Trudeau, but I suspect that she did. And again, that suggests a very wide-ranging call covering lots of different issues. And remember, the only person who is in a position, in theory, to have an overview of the entire range of topics covered by the US government is the president, who is supposed to be the person in charge. But he's clearly not the person in charge, because as the New York Post says, what we see now are stories about the person who the American people elected as their president, who is Joe Biden, and he's carrying out these sort of ceremonial and, life-affirming duties, which are really of no importance, really. I mean, they may look nice for the cameras or look nice in stories, but they're not part of the actual business of governing. Whilst the actual business of governing is being done by somebody else, who is, of course, Kamala Harris, who is the vice president, who is not elected to that role, and who the Constitution does not invest with that role. So this is an extraordinary state of affairs. It is completely unprecedented. It is remarkably, extraordinarily unusual. And I agree, Biden ought to be offended and insulted about this, and so should his family and the people close to him. But I'm going to say something else. I wonder what foreign leaders are thinking. I wonder what Macron is thinking. I mean, he must have come away from this call and asked himself, well, who's the president? Who do I talk to? Let's say there's a crisis tomorrow and I need to talk to the person in charge in Washington. Let's say there's a crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean and France is involved in it. Who do I pick up the phone and speak to? Do I speak to Joe Biden or do I speak to Kamala Harris? I mean, which of them is really in charge? I mean, this sends very ambiguous messages. I'm choosing my words very carefully about who is the person in charge. And if Joe Biden is in that kind of condition where he is not able to exercise the functions of the president as head of the executive and as commander-in-chief of the US Armed Forces, then he should not be president at all and should not have been elected president, because it is not conceivable that he is suddenly facing this decline in February, which didn't exist, shall we say, in November. In fact, as we all know, there's been a great deal of speculation about Biden's, infirmities and his age, and issues about whether he's really competent or able to be president at this stage of his life. Those were never really addressed. Those issues were never really addressed at any point during the presidential election campaign, because Biden was insulated from things like that. But we saw during some of the debates with Donald Trump, particularly, by the way, the second, that, left to himself, he basically lost focus. And that, it seems to me, is what we're looking at increasingly here.
Okay, so another thing to note that the National Pulse notes is that the president has also still refused to call the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, which is also very bizarre.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the United States is my principal ally in the Middle East, one of the most important countries, from the United States' point of view, in the world. And of course, that could point to many things. Firstly, it could point to the fact that Biden has inherited this feud towards Netanyahu that his patron and sponsor Barack Obama had. But it also begs the question of whether the American bureaucracy, or at least the American leadership, are confident that Biden would survive that kind of call.
Yeah, that's the point that I was going to bring up. I think this signals that Biden is just not capable of dealing with complex geopolitical issues like what Netanyahu may present to him. And there's no doubt that Kamala Harris is not equipped with dealing with such complex situations like that as well. And then you get to even, a bigger question, which is how in God's name will Biden, confront a Putin or a Xi Jinping? Impossible. How will Kamala Harris deal with a Putin or Xi Jinping? Impossible. How in God's name can we expect Biden to travel to a G20? Impossible. So what's he going to do? Is he going to send Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris is, I'm sorry if people think that she's this incredible leader. She is not and never will be at that level to deal with Xi Jinping or Putin or Modi or any of these world leaders that are exceptional diplomats as well. I mean, not only are they leading their country, they're very good at diplomacy, and it is an art form, and these guys have it down pat. Kamala Harris just simply does not have that type of mastering of diplomacy or gravitas, which leads me to my next question, which is Biden obviously can't deal with these people. Kamala Harris is sitting in the chair and making the phone calls, but someone else or some other people are actually doing the heavy lifting. And my guess is that you're looking once again at a type of Obama shadow government. And it makes sense because the people that they are talking to are once again part of that neoliberal rat pack. In other words, friendly fire. Macron, Trudeau, people that aren't going to actually pose serious challenges and serious questions to Biden, or in this case, Kamala Harris. You're not going to have a Putin, Xi Jinping, Erdogan, Modi, Bolsonaro. I mean, the list can go on and on of people, Netanyahu, of people that are going to seriously challenge the intellect and the diplomacy skills of their counterpart, which Biden, no chance in hell that he'll be able to do it. And Kamala Harris, no chance in a million years that she'll be able to sit down and actually debate stuff with these guys. So the U.S. is in big trouble.
Absolutely. Can I just say also the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken? I mean, I've spoken to people who've had acquaintance with him, and they all describe him as a lightweight, and nothing that he's done up to now leads me to think otherwise. So we have a president who's frankly disconnected. We have a vice president who's inexperienced and who doesn't have, frankly, the abilities to sort of get on top of these things. And we have a Secretary of State who's a lightweight. And you're absolutely right. Set them against Putin or Xi Jinping. I mean, you only have to read the transcripts of Putin's discussions with world leaders and with, the massive marathon press conferences to realize that they would be completely outmatched. I mean, Putin is a master of detail. He is always on top of his brief. And as you said, he is extremely experienced and skilled at diplomacy. We know that Xi Jinping is the same. I mean, he doesn't do it as publicly as Putin does, but he is tremendously experienced and gifted in this field. These people are obviously unable to stand up and meet in a head-to-head with people like Putin and Xi Jinping and match them in the kind of one-to-one negotiations and discussions that diplomacy at its absolutely top level requires. And I agree. I am sure, by the way, Barack Obama is playing an outsized role behind the scenes. But Barack Obama cannot represent the United States at a G20 meeting. He cannot go and meet Putin and Xi Jinping because he is not the president, and he is, in fact, formally speaking, a private citizen, and he's not therefore in a position to represent the United States at any level. So, having a situation where neither the president, nor the vice president, nor the Secretary of State are really up to speed, and where the vice president is having to carry water for the president, who clearly isn't able to do his job fully, is, as you absolutely rightly say, a potential for disaster. Can I say another thing that has been making me extremely concerned is that we've seen over the last couple of days or weeks since Biden and Harris, the Biden-Harris administration began, these constant creations of study groups and in committee groups to try to agree policy on all sorts of areas. In other words, instead of making decisions and taking actions, the administration is deferring decisions and actions by kicking them into the long grass and asking the bureaucracy to come up with answers for them. That is a disaster. It is the United States on automatic pilot. It is what happened in the last days of Brezhnev to the Soviet Union, where the leader himself was no longer able to make decisions, where all the people around him were themselves very old and very unwell, and they were no longer able to take decisions, and the country was running on a kind of automatic pilot situation. Well, the Soviet Union could just about do that for a while, but the United States, as a democracy, with all the cut and thrust of policies and politics that the United States as a democracy has, I seriously wonder. And of course, the United States is at a crucial point in its history where it has to deal with China, which is a great adversary in the East. It has to deal with Russia, which is a great adversary in Europe. Very complicated relationships with the European Union. It's all sorts of issues to deal with at multiple levels, and it needs strong leadership to pull it through. Now, it's had that in the past. It doesn't seem to have it now.
Yeah. All right. We'll end there. This is, it's a funny story, and it's a comical story in one sense. But to be quite honest, it is an absolutely frightening and tragic story because, without a doubt, the U.S. is completely and utterly, from top to bottom, outmatched on the leadership scale on the international level. They are completely outmatched, and this is going to lead to absolute disasters. They are 100% out of depth here. This is the equivalent of a I don't know, like a 12-year-old a kid playing football in the UK for his school team going up against Ronaldo or Messi. I mean, I can't think of another analogy. They're completely outmatched. Completely.
Absolutely. That's entirely correct. That is exactly what it is. And we're going to see accumulating problems at every single level. Now, people go on and on about Donald Trump, but as I pointed out recently in one of our programs, we've had Sergei Lavrov, a diplomat even more experienced than Putin, talking about how, what a remarkable person Donald Trump was, and that he was a personality who knew his own mind. In this situation, this is, first of all, unique in US history. Even when presidents have been distracted, like Richard Nixon was in the last years of his presidency, or ill, as Woodrow Wilson once was, there was ultimately a person in charge who was able and capable of making the decisions. This situation, where not just the president, but the entire administration looks so ill-equipped, is a very dangerous one. And actually, I mean, I don't personally find it funny. I find it worrying and in the end tragic. I would just quickly mention that I was watching the biopic, the recent Steven Spielberg biopic on Lincoln. And my goodness, I mean, with Daniel Day-Lewis playing Lincoln, that's a president. That's how a president behaves. I mean, obviously it's partly fiction, but that was the quality of leadership that the United States has had in its history. Not just Lincoln, but also Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, you name it. There have been so many outstanding presidents. And to be reduced to this that we have now, where the president isn't able to talk to world leaders, the vice president does it in the president's place, the Secretary of State is a lightweight, and the vice president's comments are clearly prepared for her by someone else, and the bureaucracy is put in charge of carrying out reviews because the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of State haven't even worked out what their own policies are. This is unprecedented in American history, and it can only lead to bad outcomes.
All right, we'll leave it there. Alexander Burkhurst, thank you very much. Guys, look for us on Rumble, on Odyssey, and on BitChute. Look for Alexander's channel, link down below. Look for my channel, link down below. PayPal, Patreon, Subscribe Star, and Bitcoin. Bitcoin is smashing all the records. So throw us some Bitcoins. Throw some Bitcoins our way if you want to part with those Bitcoins, that is. What else? Duran Shop. Duran Shop.
Duran
merchandise.
Shop. Merchandise, absolutely. Our wonderful things, our magic mugs, our amazing hats, our long sleeve t-shirts, our hoodies, our sweatshirts. You'll find them all there. They're all amazing quality, and you support the Duran by coming to our shop too. And please join us on our channels, on our various platforms. Support us as you can, and we look forward to you joining us in our next program.
All right, take care, everybody.